As Chuck mentioned, we're now approaching the end of this session. So we're very pleased to look forward to some concluding comments from Enrico Coira. So I'm sure most of us are very well aware of Enrico's career and pedigree in our field. But just to recount some of his experience, so Enrico Coira is Director of the Centre for Health Informatics at the Australian Institute of Health Innovation at Macquarie University in Australia. He trained in medicine with a computer science PhD in artificial intelligence. And Professor Coira is Foundation Professor in Medical Informatics at Macquarie University and Director of the Centre of Health Informatics, a group which he co-founded in 2000. So with a research background in industry and academia, he has a strong international research reputation for his work on decision support and communication processes in biomedicine. So we're very pleased to welcome Enrico to present his closing comments for us.
Thank you very much, Philip. I have to say, asking me to do this summary is a very cunning plan because I've had to pay attention for the whole session. Philip started the day, I think, by running us why we are all here. And the 60-30-10 numbers are really important. 60% of healthcare is in line with best practice evidence. That means about 30% is wasted or low value and 10% leads to harm. And within that 10%, there's also a lot of patient death. So we've known that for a long time. And we've also known for a long time that decision support systems, computational systems, can make a big difference. They can help us reduce diagnostic error, delay, inappropriate investigations, all those sorts of things. Philip also reminded us of this huge translational gap, which can be up to about 17 years, between best practice research evidence getting into the hands of clinicians and affecting patients. And people have tried a whole host of methods to shorten that gap, systematic reviews, living systematic reviews, but it's very clear that we need a much more computational approach to that, which really brings us to the day itself and in fact to the whole purpose of it, which is that we're really focusing on making this all computational, finding ways of interpreting the data in our electronic records to somehow share the burden of decision making so clinicians really and patients indeed do the right sort of thing. So this move to computational knowledge is going to be foundational to this learning health system, something that Chuck has been passionate about for so long. And I really like Chuck's invitation to us today, which was to see MCBK as a global movement, to really come together as a community to try and make it happen. And Chuck reminded us of the 4 foundational principles of the manifesto, and I can just see Chuck with the manifesto charging down the halls of government saying this is how it all should be done. We have to support action to improve healthcare. We just can't be building computer stuff. We have to focus on the public good and reducing health disparity. It's really critical, I think, especially with people have hinted at during today, the big changes that are happening around the planet. Focusing on the public good is critically important. We do have to reflect the best evidence, and it needs to be fair and reusable and trusted. So I think that's the manifesto, and the more we hear it and encode it and repeat it, the better. Then we had a fantastic keynote from Graham and Bryn on FHIR. And FHIR, as you know, is an open community as well as a set of technical standards. And I thought that was a really important message that came out through that presentation to de-emphasize the technology and to emphasize people and community. And so without that sort of capacity to easily access information across our health systems globally, any learning health system vision is not going to happen. And so FHIR is part of that important process. Graham said his motivation was that healthcare processes were broken, in quotes, and that IT was part of the problem and not really part of the solution. And the whole point of FHIR is to get IT out of the way of this big transformation that we need to happen. So, and I was actually impressed by Graham saying that his crazy goal was to reduce the cost of making IT interoperable by 90%, and to release those resources, both to get better bang for the buck, but also to redeploy resources elsewhere. and saying that he's sort of achieving that already. And I haven't seen those numbers before, but if that's true, there's something you can write on your gravestone. I really made a huge contribution. Bryn, I think, in his part of the talk, started to hint at just how hard this really is. That we're looking not just at shifting data, we're looking at lexical, syntactic, semantic, logical, and process interoperability. And Graham started to discuss in the questions the challenge of whether that's top down or bottom up, and FIRE's taken a bottom up approach, starting with the data and hoping that we get to those higher levels with time. I thought Graham made a really important point that maybe was not emphasized, which is he said that FIRE was, in quotes, nice. It's not a silver bullet. It only works if it actually is agreed upon by communities, and total agreement is not going to happen. And I thought I would just think about that in a different way, which is that when it comes to standards, we kind of have three groups of people. We have standard makers, we have standard takers, and unfortunately we have standard breakers. And the makers are folks like FIRE who focus on technical specifications. But the problem in our world is that there are always competing standards, and there are always new standards, and people can't agree on things. I love this, the story that people describe standards as, say, standards are a bit like toothbrushes. Everybody agrees they're important, but they all want their own. And that's always a problem. I think one of the beauties of FIRE is that they are trying to solve that problem by being an open community and being open source. In other words, trying to get outside of the competition by being open, public, and essentially free. Then there are standard takers, and that might be industry, health services, government. And they will take a standard or adopt a standard because they're told to, because it's the law, because it's compliance, or because there are benefits to doing so. And when we have competing standards, sadly, we see gravitation of groups into different shared interests. Graham talked about governments being both an opportunity and a problem when they run health systems, given the life cycles. If you've got a 15-year procurement life cycle, then even if you might want to adopt FIRE, that might be 10 years away in your life cycle. The other big thing that Graham mentioned was that governments also like to control the health services they deliver. And FIRE, by its very nature, is open, and they might not want to do that because that might reduce their control on services. We haven't heard too much about vendors, but Graham mentioned how important the IT industry is to adoption, not just of FIRE, I would argue, but for the whole learning health system vision. We also heard discussions about barriers for workforce for FIRE, and I have to say that's not just a barrier for FIRE. We are seeing challenges with people in machine learning, AI, digital health, and in the specialized areas like FIRE. We just can't seem to get enough workforce. And I think that the rate at which the whole digital health enterprise has expanded in the last 5 years has caught everybody on the hop. We've always wished for it, but it's arrived, and we're not quite ready really to feed the beast. And then I think Graham reminded us that the one way to cut through all these problems is to get past institutional self-interest and to focus on values and patients. And if we can get people to focus on why we're doing it, and our real customers, the patients, are driving decisions, then that might be a way of cutting through the self-interest of industry or government, and getting people to all come to the same page. So a really important set of meta issues around that. You've just heard the second keynote, so I'm not going to say too much about it. It was an excellent overview of computable knowledge in China, focusing on their large-scale chronic kidney disease pilot. What I thought was really interesting in the talk was it's clear that there are parallel streams of knowledge being used. There is the so-called narrative knowledge from guidelines and the literature, as well as knowledge being extracted through text mining, and then sort of computational phenotypes that are emerging out of electronic records. And it's very clear to many of us, I think, that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be using all those different sources of best practice, whether it's from observational data or the research enterprise in parallel. And I just wanted to conclude by pointing you to a great paper that's in JAMIA, the Journal of the American Medical Informatics Association, by one of our colleagues, Adam Dunn, looking at evidence synthesis and saying that in the future, this whole dichotomy between narrative and observational data will disappear. In the future, research trials will be published online as computable objects themselves, which means that all our knowledge objects can be updated in real time as new trials report. And this is an old vision in a way. Ida Sim many years ago also was a great proponent of that. So it's nice to think about both where we are pragmatically, where we're going to go in the short term, and actually the kind of exciting longer term vision. And with that, I'll stop. I'll thank the organisers very much for putting me in this situation, and back to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Enrico. So let's call Wendy back now for just to bring a close to this session.
Well, this has been an amazing morning, been really fed, and thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the great discussions that we had in the breakout rooms, and for Enrico for his insightful summary. So a quick preview of day 2. So Chuck and Philip will have a short sleep before they wake up and host session 1 of day 2, and then we will meet again at the same time, 9 a.m. Australia time and 7 a.m. in China tomorrow. And on that day, we will have a keynote speech from Jeffrey Braithwaite, who's the one who wrote that 60-30-10 paper. And if you haven't seen him speak before, you will be have a lot of fun. He's very, very fun. We'll also have some interactive networking with a huddle session to talk about topics of interest. And then we'll close with a discussion about how do we really mobilize CBK around the world. And so really looking forward to your participation in that. Chuck and Philip, do you have any closing thoughts?
Philip?
Not at this time of the night, no.
Well, it's been quite an experience to participate in a meeting that has stretched over so many time zones. I want to thank everybody for their participation, their active participation, their contributions of lightning talks, and the contributions of the keynote speakers in particular. So we are going to say good night. We look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow evening, our time, morning, your time, if you're in Asia and Australia. And Wendy, back to you for any final comments you'd like to make.
All right. Thanks again. I've learned so much from this session and been searching websites for the really fabulous tools that people are creating and sharing, and really admire the openness of this community and the desire to make a huge impact. So we'll see you next time.